This episode of New Politics was released on the 20th of February, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
Is there a generational change in the Liberal Party, or is it still facing its ultimate demise? Why is One Nation calling all the shots on immigration and following a racist agenda when it's hardly got any seats in Parliament? There's a lot of dog whistling going on in federal politics, there's a lot of open racism, and this has got the potential to drag Australian politics down into a race to the bottom. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis, and all of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. You can listen in, share, subscribe and support New Politics at Patreon and Substack. It's just $5 per month. Or you can donate directly at our website at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
The new leader of the opposition, Angus Taylor, has just announced his new frontbench, and while the faces might be different, it's using the same rhetoric that used to come out of the mouth of Peter Dutton and then before him Scott Morrison.
We'll stand for an immigration policy that puts the interests of Australians first and puts Australian values at the centre of that policy. If someone doesn't subscribe to our core beliefs, the door must be shut.
There's a wide range of other issues going on as well, David. There's lower taxes, cutting waste and a whole lot of other ethereal type stuff. This one coming from the new Shadow Treasurer, Tim Wilson.
We need a government with an economic focus that is actually going to be in the best interest of Australians to lower the cost of living, protect living standards and drive the economic dynamism so that the next generation of Australians can look forward with hope. And most importantly, we need an economic agenda that's very clearly focused on hard work paying off, because that's the basis in which Australians are going to be hopeful about their future. Hope is on the way.
So there's a lot of talk about hope there, but there's a big difference between hope and hopeless. And they've also ramped up the fear on housing, on negative gearing, changes to capital gains tax. And I know it's only been less than a week, but when there's a leadership change, the new team has to hit the ground running. But this is the same messaging that made the Liberal Party lose the election in 2022, and it's the same messaging that ended up decimating the Liberal Party at the 2025 federal elections. So you'd think that the party would have learnt by now that it's not the messenger that's the problem, it's the message, and that's what needs to change for the Liberal Party.
I'll call them the far right of the Liberal Party, not to be confused with the far right One Nation represents, which isn't to be confused with the far right that the parties to the right of One Nation represent, although there's not a lot of difference between all of them. But the far right of the Liberal Party want power on their own terms, don't know how to get it and don't know how to use it when they do get it. They will undermine and betray and leak and everything against any leader who is not 100% in line with them. We saw that with Malcolm Turnbull. We saw that with, we can go back to people like Brendan Nelson. Suzanne Lee, for all her faults, was never going to last as Liberal leader, particularly in retrospect, because she didn't fall in 100% into that Dutton-esque, Abbott-esque, Morrison-esque, far right-wing cronyism, chaotic, anti-immigration. And when we say anti-immigration, they'll take any number from England, New Zealand, Western Europe, Canada. Anti-immigration boils down to, let's have a look at the numbers and what can the country sustain in terms of pure numbers of people, into we want a nation of 150 million all made up of Caucasians, preferably. We might take Western Europeans, and maybe on the edge of Eastern Europe. But we don't want people from Asia, we don't want people from Africa, despite the overwhelming evidence being that the biggest visa overstayers, the biggest, and these are still a minority of people, but the biggest problems in immigration law come from the Anglosphere. British backpackers overstaying their welcome, New Zealanders overstaying their welcome again. And by welcome, I mean their official welcome in terms of the correct visa. Again, this is a minority of people. It's not at all to disparage the contributions made by immigrants of all backgrounds. We've had the anti-Muslim rhetoric ramp up again. The mosque, which I live not very far from, I can see it from my place in Lakemba, the biggest mosque in Australia, has had several threats against it and its congregation, which is disgraceful. They've had a half-hearted attempt to show outrage, not the people in the mosque, of course, who are very frightened and who are very outraged, but the governments have I'll give them this, they've tried to be supportive. I don't think they've been terribly
Tried just
supportive.
a little bit.
Yeah,
just a tiny little bit.
They've acknowledged
tiny
that
little
it's
bit.
probably not good to be threatening public buildings, no matter what the stripe.
Yeah, but I just feel that this change, and I guess the leadership change was always going to be inevitable for the Liberal Party, but I just feel that it's all a little bit underwhelming, because usually when there's a leadership change, there's a bit of a buzz about it. And you referred to this before, David, and we can see why the change was made. When you've got a leader who's been performing as poorly as Susan Lee did, and maybe it wasn't a personal thing, it's just that she wasn't allowed to perform properly. But when there is a change of a leader, you can see that there's a release of pressure and there's a certain level of freshness in the team. But it just doesn't seem to be the case here. Angus Taylor was a non-performer when he was the minister in government. He was a non-performer in opposition, and he was the shadow treasurer for 3 years, and he was highly ineffective. And he's got to take some responsibility for the massive election loss for the Liberal Party that it suffered at the last election. And he's also got all of those allegations of corruption during his time in government, and the electorate can sometimes forget about all of these sort of issues, but not if there's so much corruption or so many allegations of corruption. And the other point is that the Liberal Party is presenting this as some kind of generational change, but Angus Taylor is almost 60, and it's never going to be about the age, but he's been in Parliament for 13 years, so he's not exactly a fresh face. There's still a lot of IPA types within the Liberal Party's MPs, so it's not exactly a generational shift or a philosophical reset.
And the IPA is where you take your unemployable kids and get them a job. The ridiculousness of their policies is beyond. And I know that there's a couple of big names at the top, but we're not seeing we're seeing a reversion back. Suzanne Lee, again, I'm not going to paint her as a good woman torn down by mediocrities. She was a woman torn down by mediocrities, no doubt. But she's not the monarch across the sea type thing. But she did represent at least an acknowledgement that moderates in the party are what's needed. She didn't get much of a honeymoon period. I don't remember any soft press about her in the way that they normally do a family profile, and she goes to Woman's Weekly and does a fairly in-depth interview and appears on 60 Minutes laughing around the kitchen type stuff. I don't remember any of that. And to be fair, that might have been her trying to approach things in a new way. I do remember complaints about her from day one after they'd elected her. Who voted for her? If all you don't like her, who voted for her? And I did think that she might hold on just because the rules have made it very hard to change a leader, which is how Dutton managed to stay on till the election, which in retrospect may have been a mistake for him and for everybody else. Although I don't think so. I think the problems of the parties aren't who it is. I think you could put in Lazarus with a quadruple bypass and a heart transplant carried in by the angels of God himself or herself, and they'd still have problems because the problems are structural. They're policy. The friction between a 21st century Australia trying to operate on with a party trying to manage it on, let's be generous, mid-20th century philosophies, post-Keynesianism and stuff that starts to emerge in the 60s and takes hold in the 70s, is dominant throughout the 80s. And the failings start to become obvious in the 90s, though they hold on to it for another 30 years. And I think that's the problem. It doesn't matter who. We could resurrect Bob Menzies and put John Howard in the cabinet and Malcolm Fraser and all the successful Liberal leaders, and it would still fail. Of course, Angus Taylor, when he got the job, social media was flooded by, what was it? Good job, well done, Angus. From the infamous time where he'd clearly forgotten to log out of his own Facebook account and go into a phony account to push things in. This type of mistake would be forgotten if it was someone competent. We'd laugh about it for a couple of weeks and then 5 years later be reminded, oh, yeah, that's right. Oh. But because it's Angus Taylor, it's really the motto of his political career. Fantastic, well done, good job, Angus, rather than any substantial policy achievement.
Well, it's almost like they're all saying well done to themselves as well. And with some of the stuff, you're just left wondering if they actually noticed what did actually happen at the 2025 federal election. Here's Jane Hume, the new deputy leader of the Liberal Party.
Well, if people were open-minded to the idea of lifting the moratorium on nuclear energy, which is a bill that I brought forward as a backbencher, so that we can have a zero emissions technology introduced into our country, as every other developed nation has either done or is in the process of doing, well, then that would add to that energy abundance that would bring prices down over time.
And David, the federal election wasn't that long ago, less than a year ago, and it's not as though people would have forgotten about all of this, but the nuclear energy package that the Liberal Party took to the last election, well, that went down like a lead balloon. Well, it was actually 9 lead balloons, one for each reactor that they were promising, and weighed down by a ton of bricks as well. But it was a poorly thought out policy. It was uneconomic. No one actually wants a nuclear reactor in their backyard. Now, there might be popular support for nuclear energy, but just no one wants a nuclear reactor in their backyard. And they're starting to ramp up net zero and energy wars again. And I think that focusing on these really bad policies cost them big time at the last election. And now they're behaving as though the 2025 federal election just never happened. They're wheeling out all of this bad stuff again and again and again and again. And it just seems like they're not prepared to learn the lessons from all of their recent election defeats.
It's Rocky and Bullwinkle with the magic trick, this time for sure. We'll just keep going. And then we can pivot to Peanuts with Charlie Brown and the football. Lucy Van Pelt, in this case the electorate, is going to pull the football out just before they kick it every single time because the policies don't work anymore. They never worked, but now they're seen not to work. And until they realise
But I guess that's my question. Like, what if these policies didn't work, they haven't worked for the past 2 elections, why do they keep going back to these same policies?
There's a part of me that thinks they actually like losing, giving that concession speech where the whole of Australia is looking at you. You know, you get the chance to show what a good person you were. It is bizarre, except I think there's so much money tied up in preserving that system. I think, too, that system has served them pretty well, or at least served their predecessors pretty well. And the problem there is that it just doesn't work, and it's not serving anyone except a very few very well. And they want to keep those people happy for some reason. Instead of saying, we've moved on, we have to be more post-Keynesian, we have to be more definitely post-neoliberal. We have to come up with better ways of doing things, or at least examine what things in a better way. I know that there's people listening to us who are big supporters of modern monetary theory, and whose basic argument is that money actually works in a different way to what we're told it works, and that there is unlimited money for the stuff that you want to do. And I've simplified it and probably got it a bit wrong, but you all know, those of you who support know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who don't, look it up. You know, it's an interesting and I think a worth examining approach to take. I think we have other people who think that the system works okay, but we need to change the priority. You know, less defence, more health, less law and order in terms of draconian approaches to things, more education, less tax breaks for billionaires, more social welfare systems, for example. And that's fine too. The point is that the Liberal Party don't seem to have the will. And the cabinet reshuffle got rid of a lot of the moderates and put in, as you said, IPA types. Tim Wilson is shadow treasurer. It's almost as if someone dared them. I bet you can't get a worse treasurer than Josh Frydenberg. Hold my beer. Tim, come over here. Someone said, if the answer is Tim Wilson, what is the question? I suspect the question is, who is one of the worst people to ever sit in the House of Representatives since Federation? That's a good question, I can think.
Well, it's only been the first week, David, so maybe we're just being a little bit unfair, but
People do grow into roles.
yeah, well, but also life is not a fair place. So,
No.
We've got to lay the boots in whenever we can. But Angus Taylor has had quite a few stumbles in this first week, and it's been word salad after word salad, and just hasn't been very much beyond the culture war stuff and that conservative rhetoric that's been going on for years and years and years and years. And you would have thought that someone who's been angling for the leadership position for such a long time would have some kind of solid manifesto to talk about. And I assume that it wouldn't be about modern monetary theory, but at least you'd have some manifesto to talk about or at least refer to. But there was just none of that. And he's got the support of the party. There's absolutely no question about that. But he won the ballot by 34 votes to 17. And I'd say that those 17 votes in that ballot, those people that voted against Angus Taylor, that's probably where the future of the Liberal Party lies. But when those sort
If it
of
has a
ideas,
future.
yeah, well, that's right. But those sort of ideas and those sort of people, but when you're outnumbered in the party in that sort of way by 2/3 to 1/3, well, that suggests that there is not much of a future for the Liberal Party.
No. Australians tend not to do big ruptures. Having said that, 1917, 1931, 1954 for the Labor Party. I don't think the Liberal Party tends to just quietly reform. I think there's going to have to be massive purges over the next term if they want any chance for the 2031 election. They can forget about 2028. That's not possible for them. Labor may do badly, but mathematically they'll still end up with a majority. In the absolute worst case scenario, it'll be some kind of minority government. But I think there's way too many seats for it to even go to that. I think they can lose 30 seats and still have a pretty solid majority. So 2028 is that time. What I think Angus Taylor needs to do, and I don't think he's got the temperament for it, is to do what Simon Crean did when he was leader of the Labor Party, which was go down and restructure everything as best as he could. And Brendan Nelson sort of tried it, and who was the other one? But most Liberal leaders, if not all of them, don't think in terms of long term because they want to be Prime Minister and they believe that they are destined to be Prime Minister. And ambition and ego is part of the qualifications for politics. So that a politician would say, I want to be Prime Minister at the next election is not something I can really judge them for because they all say that. But the strategic thinking would be, well, it won't be next election. That's just mathematically not possible. We'll try our best and we might gain 30 seats, which I think is impossible for the Liberal Party. I think the Liberal Party has gone down to the other choice. They've been almost a protest vote. It's where One Nation and the Greens lay. I think that's where the Liberal Party is at the moment.
Oh, well, it was hard to miss during the week, but the big focus for the Liberal Party, speaking of going over to the right, but the big focus for the Liberal Party during the week has been on this idea of good immigration and bad immigration. And this started up after Pauline Hanson brought up the issue during the week.
The year is 2018 and the right-wing senator took a trip to Lakemba. 8 years later, the same disdain for the most concentrated Muslim area in the country.
How can you tell me there are good Muslims?
Today, toning down her language but refusing to apologise.
That's what they want, a world caliphate. And I'm not going to apologise for the fact is I will have my say now before it's too late.
And calling out Lakemba again.
It concerns me greatly that people can't go into certain suburbs in this country.
Now, David, we live just around the corner from Lakemba. You're closer to Lakemba than I am, but I've got family in Lakemba. I go there all the time. I never feel threatened. No one has given me a hard time. No one has ever said, no, you are not allowed to come here. So what's Pauline Hanson on about?
The Lakemba Ramadan Festival starts the week of listening, and it's a wonderful community event. During the month of Ramadan, Muslim people fast from sunup to sundown, and you break that fast of the evening. And so they have this massive food festival on Holden Street It's really wonderful, and everybody's welcome. Doesn't matter what your belief system is, doesn't matter what your background is. You are welcome to go and enjoy the food and enjoy the community and have a great time.
And are you allowed to go into Lakemba? Do you need a special permit or a
I'm not,
passport or something like that? Like, is there an issue going into Lakemba?
There is a no riffraff sign at the front, so that's why I'm not allowed in. No, that's not true. Everyone is allowed in. It's perfectly safe. It's filled with people of all ages, backgrounds, and it's a really nice snapshot of Muslim Australia. There are Indonesian Muslims, Bangladeshi Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, Indian Muslims, and of course Middle Eastern Muslims. And as far as I can tell, there's Shias and Sunnis, and it's not exclusive at all.
And there's Australian Muslims as well.
There's Australian Muslims as well, and there are Australian Christians and non-believers and Jehovah's Witnesses. I suppose not Jehovah's Witnesses, but because of their own religious restrictions. But there's Jewish people. There's Hindus show up. There's Parsis. The whole community is represented. They've restricted it to only 4 nights a week. It used to be the full month of Ramadan, but now it's Thursday through Sunday. I suspect that that's partly the council saying we can't close off the main street every night of the week because it makes trade, getting deliveries for trade and stuff in, difficult. There's suggestions that particular lobby groups have tried to close it down, and this was but I don't know how true that is. But it is a wonderful event. So to talk about good Muslims and bad Muslims, I think is as ridiculous as talking about good One Nation members and bad One Nation members. It's probably a mix, and I know who's probably got the higher proportion of bad to good, but that's for another time.
But I guess the point is that we get this gratuitous racism from the mouth of Pauline Hanson, and it's been like this for 30 years, and she hasn't been in Parliament for all of that time. But the issue is that when she speaks, well, Angus Taylor ramps this stuff up about immigration, the numbers are too high, standards are too low, whatever that means. But, well, I guess we know what he's talking about. But this is your standard dog whistling tactic, but it's played with a trombone and a saxophone, then plugged into an amplifier and megaphone. So Angus Taylor ramps it all up. And then we had the Labor Party joining in as well when they decided to impose a 2-year ban on Australian women and children stuck in Syria, even though they were born in Australia and are Australian citizens. Now, it might have been a case where the Albanese government was going to impose this 2-year ban anyway, but they just wanted to let everyone know about this decision, also played with a bit of a megaphone.
We won't repatriate them, and indeed the government was taken to court by one of the non-government organisations saying that we had a responsibility, and they weren't successful in that. My mother would have said, if you make your bed, you lie in it. These are people who went overseas supporting Islamic State and went there to provide support for people who basically want a caliphate. We have a very firm view that we won't be providing assistance or repatriation.
So that was the Prime Minister using similar language to Pauline Hanson, going on about the caliphate and all this other rubbish. But David, this is a complex case. I'm not going to suggest that it's a simple or an easy case, but it just seems like women there are being punished for the sins of their husbands, who are all dead now, and the children are being punished too. And okay, you can make the political case to not pay for the reparations and the transportations. I guess that's always going to be difficult to justify politically, but to not offer consular assistance, essentially saying, well, look, your Australian passport doesn't mean anything at all. It just seems like that principle has just been thrown away. And I guess the other point is that these political parties are now trying to outdo each other: Liberal Party, National Party, One Nation, Labor Party. And I think the main point here is that if you look at the last federal election, Labor won 94 seats and the Coalition won 42 seats. And One Nation didn't win any seats at all. And in the Senate, it holds 4 Senate seats out of 76 seats. So out of the 226 seats on offer in Parliament, One Nation won 4 seats, or less than 2% of the overall number of seats in federal Parliament. But One Nation speaks, Pauline Hanson opens up her ugly mouth with outright and unfiltered racism, and then the rest of politics stands up and listens and tries to outdo her. Although we did have this comment from Senator Matt Canavan from the National Party.
This statement from Pauline was divisive, inflammatory. It's un-Australian, totally un-Australian for someone to say that 800,000 Australians, of those 800,000 Australians who are Muslim, there's no good people among them. That's what Pauline said. Now, clearly, I think she went too far, and now she won't apologise because she doesn't do that. She never admits that she makes mistakes. We all do. That's what Pauline should do, because clearly, I mean, we just had a Muslim Australian, Ahmed Al-Ahmed, save lives at Bondi. He was a Muslim Australian, he's an Australian hero. So what does Pauline have to say to him? Someone who saved Australian lives in Bondi. Now, Pauline, the last few weeks, has been putting out there that she may want to be Prime Minister of Australia. She just proved yesterday why she's not a leader of Australia. She's not fit to lead a major political party with these types of ill-disciplined statements that she won't correct, that insult hundreds of thousands of Australians. It is just not something that I think is part of our country.
So that was Matt Canavan from the National Party, but this is something that the Prime Minister should have said about One Nation and Pauline Hanson, not just trying to copy her or outdo her.
Matt Canavan, of course, is not one of the more outstanding members of the National Party, but he was right to call her out. And, of course, you can see with Hanson, she doesn't learn. She started off as anti-Asian crusading, and that sort of faded away. And then she went to anti-African, and that sort of faded away. And now she's on anti-Muslim. And we know that she doesn't really understand what that means, because a few years back, of course, she was asked about, what about Christians from the Middle East? And she said, we've got no objection to Christian Muslims, which philosophically is such a mess. And yet we all make mistakes. I've made I made one once, but turned out I was wrong about that. But before you start commenting, you should have an idea of what does it mean to be called a Muslim. It's not someone from the Middle East necessarily. A lot of people are, but it's like, to say to her, it's like Catholicism. Just because you're from Ireland doesn't mean you're a Catholic necessarily. The vast majority of people in Ireland are Catholic or nominally Catholic. But she doesn't learn. Instead of realising that, actually, the Asian immigration was all right, and think, maybe the rest, move on to African immigration. And it turns out that the vast majority of African immigrants are good people. But instead of sort of saying, there's a pattern here that maybe most immigrants are good people.
But there's no votes in that, David.
But when we look at Hawke,
well, there might not be any votes anyway. I guess that's the other thing.
When Hawke allowed the Chinese students after Tiananmen Square to stay in one of the great humanitarian movements of that government, when Fraser allowed Vietnamese refugees in, Kampuchean refugees in, because he could see what happened. When Keating allowed, the country got a little bit better. The country showed the potential of what it might be. After Howard, we have less of these. When Australia reaches out, we're a much better place than when we close in. And again, that's not to say that we shouldn't have discussions on how many people should we allow in, and we need to look at the demography of stuff, and refugee policy is challenging at times. Now, to be fair, we don't get that many refugees because it's so far to get here. So we're not dealing with the millions of people that they are in Europe or in places like Syria and Jordan. They have to keep moving on. And it's horrible and it's awful, but that's the reality of it. I suspect the Liberal Party moved closer to a Fraser model, and the Liberal Party hates Malcolm Fraser. You know that they just want to go to Parliament House and take his picture off the wall and say Labor Light or something here. We don't talk about 75 through to 83.
Or replace his image with an auto pen.
Yeah, it replaces... But Australia's better. Even when Hubert Oppenheimer starts to loosen White Australia policies in the 60s as immigration minister for Menzies and Holt, which Al Grasby finishes in 72. He as immigration minister, he closes the White Australia policy off officially. And of course, the post-war immigration from Eastern Europe. Australia is a better place when we open up a little bit to when we try and close down, and it becomes a worse, smaller, more emptily bureaucratic place rather than the place that we tell everybody it is. And I'm wondering if there are members of the Liberal Party, there's not many of them left, who understand this.
I'm sure there probably would be, but we can see that migration and immigration, well, that's shaping up as a big strategic battlefield for the Liberal Party and, well, also for One Nation as well. But it's a catch-all issue. If you're stuck in a traffic jam, well, you blame immigration. If there's inflation or a high cost of living, well, you blame immigration. You blame the immigrant. And long queue at the post office, blame the immigrant. And if you're not feeling great or feeling a little bit depressed, well, you go and blame immigrants and immigration. So, blame the immigrant for absolutely everything. And that means that you don't have to develop any sensible policy or any policy at all. And every problem in Australia can be solved by blaming migrants and cutting immigration. So this has got the potential to be incredibly ugly. We have the good Muslim, bad Muslim narrative floating around, pushed by Pauline Hanson. We don't know who's acceptable or who decides who's acceptable. But this is where national leadership comes into play. And we've talked about those figures before about who holds the seats in government, and the Labor government is in this incredibly powerful position. The Liberal Party's in disarray despite their new leadership and shadow cabinet. One Nation is pretty much nothing in Parliament. But despite all of this Labor government just cannot push its authority on this. And it's almost like it's behaving like some kind of government in exile and can't do anything about these issues. But they're the government of the day. They should be able to force these issues.
It's like their economic achievements. It's only now that they're starting to sort of suggest that maybe they do manage the economy better than the Liberal Party in real and substantial ways. It's something that I'd have thought Labor should be very proud of, stopping the openly racist White Australia policy for good. And it's something that you'd think that the entrepreneurial, individualist Liberal Party, you come over here from overseas and you make a good life for yourself, and it doesn't matter your background because the system is there for you to do this. You just need to work hard. And of course, none of this is quite true, but it makes for a good story. And you'd think that that would work with their narrative too. Well, look at this. We've got somebody from Vietnam came over on the boat, and they now are a successful businessman with a large house and 3 cars and a successful family and doing very well. And not only do we acknowledge it, we honour it as something that shows Australia at its best. But instead we get immigrants are bad. At the same time, we're getting nobody will come and pick fruit for us under terrible conditions. It's hard to get house cleaners. Aged care work, no one will do it, except aged care facilities are filled with recent immigrants because they want the work, because they need the work. And fruit pickers, immigrants, and on it goes. The jobs that nobody wants start off with first generation immigrants who are working hard, looking down the track, which is what our immigration policy people aren't doing. They're not looking down the track.
But I guess the other issue is that that's been well described there, but by the time you make these descriptions and outline the good positive aspects of all of these issues that the Liberal Party is attacking, well, the audience has moved on. People haven't got time to listen to these descriptions. They just take the headline message that's coming from the Liberal Party. And I guess we've also seen a flavour of some of the key...
Except for the good listeners in New Politics.
Well, that's right, exactly. But I guess we've seen a flavour of some of the key points that the Liberal Party is now going to attack, and they've also started mentioning capital gains tax and negative gearing. And after these two issues being a big factor at the 2019 federal election, or as far as the Labor Party is concerned, I think there were a whole lot of other issues that determined that election. But after they lost that 2019 federal election, these issues are like kryptonite for the Labor government. And if the idea is to make housing more affordable for more people, well, negative gearing and capital gains tax just needs to be reformed. And there's a whole lot of other reforms that need to be made as well. And on these issues, capital gains tax and negative gearing and housing, we can probably predict exactly what's going to happen here, David. And there's going to be a big scare campaign launched by the Liberal Party on these issues. The Labor government will go to water over this, and housing across Australia will become more unaffordable. And I think it also gets back to some of those criticisms that we've had about Anthony Albanese, that he's a manager of issues. He's a manager of political issues as they arise, rather than someone who actually sets the agenda. And if we see the Liberal Party moving to the right, and that's pretty obvious what's happening there, well, where will the Labor Party go? Where will the Labor government go if it keeps drifting with Albanese's caution, his trademark caution, and playing it safe? Well, if you go down that path, you end up playing to the tune that's run by the Liberal Party and One Nation to a lesser extent. And then politics just ends up being this race to the bottom. And then you think, well, will the federal government start following the path of the New South Wales Labor government and Premier Chris Minns, with all this tough on crime stuff and reducing people's rights? And I think that ends up being the end result of all of this sort of stuff. Everything is being dragged to the right because the government of the day just wasn't strong enough to stop it.
I mean, what happened in New South Wales was just appalling. Minns should resign. The police commissioner should resign. All police involved in the beatings should be drummed out of the New South Wales police force. And that was Minns not really knowing what he wanted with the job once he got it, kowtowing to various lobby groups and trying to act like a big man in front of everyone. He's now completely undermined the credibility of the New South Wales Police Force, an organisation that is filled with brilliant and good and noble people, but not everyone is brilliant and good and noble. I think that's fair to say, and never has been. I think if we don't want our federal government to go that way, they have to have a good hard look at how do we manage this. And by managing is not saying, One Nation said that, well, we're going to do it so we look better and on top of it. It's saying, no, for Matt Canavan to be the adult in the room is astonishing. And I am no fan of Matt Canavan's, but he was right. He was right to say that. And it means that when the Nationals collapse and he's looking for a place in One Nation, he mightn't get it. Having said that, Corey Bernardi has gone across. That's going to be funny because Corey's disaffected supporters, a good proportion went into One Nation, and they won't forget what he did in terms of folding the party after he did about as well as expected. So they might decide that Matt Canavan is worth it. We'll see. But Labor is always at its best when it remembers its collectivist roots. And collectivism is a different thing now to what it was in 1890, but it's still a thing. And that when we band as communities, when we look after each other as communities, and we don't cut each other off as individuals. And I know that there'd be Liberal Party people who say, oh, that's not what individualism means. But no, it's not. But that's how it often ends up. I think Labor has to remember that it is a collectivist party, and that it means including everybody, not just bashing into people who you don't like. And worse, people who you don't like for no substantial reason.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.